Military analyst and author Tom Cooper has been closely monitoring the front lines in Ukraine since the early days of Russia's full-scale invasion. In this interview, we will discuss Russia's current push near Sumy, China's growing role in the war, Europe's real readiness to defend democratic values, and whether Ukraine's defense industry could become a long-term strategic investment for the West. Tom, nice to see you again.
Hello, nice to be with you again. Thank you very much for the invitation.
So, Tom, Russian forces are steadily advancing in Sumy region. And how successful are they right now on the battlefield? Is this a tactical move or part of a broader offensive plan?
Well, you can't say that Russians are, in terms of military situation, particularly successful anywhere. It is not that they are, running big-scale offensives, or in terms of classic, what we are used to see over the last 80 years, mechanized operation, mobile operation, in terms of big formations of troops, of heavy equipment, of tanks, of artillery, and so on, moving in big formations, more or less, at least in columns, and advancing and moving and whatever else. No, this is not happening. What is happening is that Russia is, well, successful sort of in continuing to keep Ukraine under pressure through relentless, constant, small-scale attacks by infantry and all sorts of improvised vehicles. And this is what is pushing Ukrainian forces back, because these relentless attacks are supported by UAVs. Nowadays, these are fiber optic, cable-guided UAVs. They are supported by UMP. Okay, let's call them the way you're calling them in Ukraine. This is CAB glide bombs, which are not particularly precise, and from time to time missing by 10 to 15 kilometers. But on the other hand, sometimes they are precise enough to cause damage to forward Ukrainian positions. And the Ukrainian foremost top commanders have no solution for this. They have no strategy. They have no ideas how to solve the situation. Syrskyi is, well, at least he has largely stopped moving battalions from one section of the front line to another. Drapati is overloaded with all the work he is required to do. On one side, he has to retrain and reorganize, reform the armed forces, ground forces. On the other hand, he has to command this or that sector time and again. At least until this corps command structure is up and working. And so the Russians are simply exploiting this opportunity to continue keeping Ukraine under pressure. So they are not going to now drive all the way to Kupiansk, not to talk about Kharkiv or to Sumy, but they are still making their advances of 20 to 200 meters a day, and this cannot be denied.
I was just reading the article this morning that David Petraeus, American general, he said that after Ukraine, Putin will go to Lithuania after he will capture Ukraine. And this is, I cannot say it's funny, it's not funny at all, but it's kind of ironic. How can you predict and even see that Russia can capture Ukraine?
Yeah. Look, I've been declared for unprofessional and whatever else, so let me give you my unprofessional opinion. I consider such assessments by professional experts for entirely pointless. Nobody can predict the future. That is the first point. The second point is there is now it is kind of a trend, kind of fashion in military analysis right now to claim Putin ante portas and he's going to invade NATO, he's going to invade Baltic states or Finland or something. This is currently in fashion. Therefore, everybody is doing this. It's as simple as that. Back in 2022, it was in fashion to expect Ukrainian collapse any moment.
Absolutely.
And this went on from February until August 22. Then it was fashionable to declare Ukraine or to expect or to announce some sort of a massive, major Ukrainian victory in a matter of weeks, where single blow defeat of Russia, that was from September 22 until around March 23, and so on and so on. So you always have such things, and I don't understand them, and excuse me for especially not even paying attention anymore about this, because this is ridiculous. Yeah. I mean, at most I can explain this with a very very simple or relatively simple fashion. NATO is currently rearming itself, not particularly fast, not particularly, bolstering. There are no major operations of bolstering its capabilities. One is refurbishing one airbase here and another airbase there, and then refurbishing or reorganizing or rebuilding the railway tracks from Poland to Baltic states, and a little bit in Finland. There is enough time. There's nobody's in a hurry, and the politics is busy with arranging conferences so they can arrange meetings in order to arrange conferences in order to talk. So everybody has time.
Yeah, you said the very. Yeah, that's a very sad truth, that nobody's in a hurry anywhere.
No, why? Because it's more flashy and more useful for PR purposes to stage press conferences and meetings and yet more conferences and talk about talking. Because if one would now have to bring some decisions, that could be very politically damaging, for the politicians in question. And so, okay, I can understand if the new German chancellor says no, he's not going to reveal future military aid for Ukraine, but if nothing else, then he has his buddies under apostrophes from the Ministry of Defense who like to brag about what is being sent to Ukraine, and therefore they are leaking the details about things they shouldn't be leaking. And if it is nothing of that kind, then there is somebody else who has something against this or that kind of politics, and therefore they are leaking information and so on. So basically, well, we didn't manage to under apostrophes, didn't manage to help Ukraine win this war. Then Ukrainians have messed up on their own, of course, and they are alone to blame. Nobody else is to blame, and well. But never mind, let's organize another press conference so we are appearing on the TV this evening. This is important.
Yes. At the same time, President Zelensky said that Chinese Mavic drones are no longer available to Ukraine, but Russia still has access, even with the Chinese factories inside Russia. Does this mean China is now systematically supporting Russia despite claiming that they are neutral?
The Chinese are neutral, actually. And wasn't it that there were specific decisions and statements by the government in Kiev about 1 year ago? It was, as far as I recall, in early 2024. Chinese wouldn't have stopped exports of materials for UAVs to Ukraine. Back then, when I've reported this on my blog, then everybody was laughing. Meanwhile, it's true. So what shall I say? What else shall I say about it anymore? And so when you ask me, are they neutral or not neutral? They are making business. Don't forget that the Russians are paying them up to 20 times what they would usually pay for the equipment they are delivering. So why shouldn't they make a big business out of it? They're earning good money. And if the West is so stupid as to permit this, where is the problem?
Yeah, but at the same time, China has also limited exports of key drones components to Europe and the United States, like critical magnets. Still, you are saying it's about money, but it looks like it's a new form of a hybrid warfare where attack control becomes a pressure tool.
Well, is anybody complaining about the extensive use of Chinese social media and modems in Europe? Nobody's complaining about this. So where is then the problem with if they are exporting UAV pieces to Russia? And if the West didn't take care to bolster its production of UAV pieces on time, which was, it had only 3 years to do so, where's the problem? The Chinese are making good money out of this. And the fact is that, for example, the exports to the United States are currently well decreased by 90%, so they have to find another market or gain themselves market share some other place. So this is what they're doing.
Okay, yes. German Chancellor Merz told US Vice President Vance that Europe is fighting for freedom and democracy. Remember when Vance said that, what are you fighting for? It sounds like a powerful words, you know, Tom, but do you see real determination behind them? Is Europe truly ready to defend those values, you know, especially when it comes to Ukraine? I know I'm asking you again and again that, but maybe you see the light at the end of the tunnel.
I'm biting my lips not to answer all the things I think about this. Excuse me. Now it is, again, I'm unprofessional, but one cannot answer to this in any. I don't know any kind of answers in professional fashion. I mean, this is talking all the time. And excuse me, but Merz is not more skilled or more capable or something else, nor his advisors, than earlier chancellor or any other president or chancellor or prime minister around Europe right now, at least not from Warsaw further west. Exceptions are to be found in Copenhagen, in Baltic states, in Sweden. But nobody cares about them. Nobody's paying attention. There are no big powers in Europe, you know, so they don't matter. It is certainly so that we have to wait and see if Merz does change anything fundamentally in regards of German foreign politics, and then in regards of how the entire EU and the entire NATO are acting vis-à-vis Ukraine. But from what I know right now about what is NATO doing is nothing. And why is this nothing? Look, one shouldn't forget that decision taking levels within NATO are always involving Americans. And right now, nobody within NATO trusts Americans. Nobody is sure that if they say something or do something, this isn't going to land via the United States, via a president who is obviously a FSB agent, actually, or at least asset, as the Russians call this, is not going to end in Moscow. So, therefore, nobody's talking with the Americans. And because they're obliged actually to talk with the Americans, they're not talking with each other either. So all of NATO is sitting there and doing this. So that is what is happening. And then there is some hope that one or another politician of these top 4 or 5, perhaps 7 major European powers might bring his or her own decision and do specific things, but in essence, nothing is moving and everybody is waiting for the weather to improve.
Tom, me as a person who's reading your blog, Sarcastosaurus, please correct me if I'm wrong.
Sarcastosaurus, yes.
Yes, and I'm reading, and I know that you support many Ukrainian units, from the 13th to 128 brigades, if I'm not mistaken, unofficial formations who still hold the front line. So my question is, how critical is the need for basic supplies, vehicles, medical kits, something else?
Mm-hmm. Well, as far as I can say or assess it, it's a little bit better than it was during the winter. It is simply so. We have less requests for specific kind of, let's say, simple equipment, simple expendables, and there are more requests for specialized equipment. That means the situation is a little bit better in general, but there are still items which are missing, you know, like vehicles in particular. Overall, I would assess as the mass of Ukrainian army units being something like 50% under-equipped with simple cars, SUVs, call them whatever you like, vans, such vehicles. This is where there is the biggest problem. And there is even more problem insofar that the primary source of replacement vehicles, which is European Union, is dry. That means there are next to no second-hand cars which could be cheaply bought in whether in Germany, UK, in France, in Italy, and then brought to Ukraine. And this is currently our biggest problem. We have enough money from donations, thanks to people who are so kind to donate for this charity, so to say. But it takes 2 or 3 months to find a single car which is not entirely broken, and then bring it to Ukraine and bring it to the units in question. And in other cases, we have to, or not me, of course, there are people in Germany, for example, there are people in the UK who are so kind to invest their private time and overhaul these vehicles before sending them to Ukraine. But this is still time-consuming and costs money as well, because if nothing else, you have to buy spares. So it's, as I said, generally the supply situation has improved itself, or has been improved, but in regards of vehicles, it's still critical, because if you have mechanized and motorized infantry brigades, but these are lacking 50% of vehicles they are supposed to have, then this cannot be called a good situation. They should be at least up to 70-80% of what they should have. And yes, I mean, theoretically the government is doing its part of the job, but I don't see this happening a lot. And it's like with the UAVs, you know, if the brigade has money, if it is well supported by donations, it can buy and afford lots of UAVs. But if not, then it's critically short on UAVs. And there are, due to this decision, was it December or January, of the Ministry of Defense to de facto create a free market for UAVs within the ZSU. The situation is such that there are brigades that have absolutely no UAVs or only enough to spend 4 of them per day. And then there are other brigades that have, well, you can never have too many of them, but at least enough UAVs, FPVs and such UAVs, to use them a whole day as much as they like. So there is a mess in total. That is my impression.
Yeah, but you know, Russians at the same time, they are modifying drones with, I don't know, shrapnel, thermobaric charges, some...
Yeah, different warheads, yes.
Yes, and is this a sign of Russian tech evolution, or just, you know, kind of a desperation, improvisation? Because I've heard that Ukrainians are quite good in that, and I thought much better.
Yeah, well, theoretically, Ukrainians, yes, are more individualistic, more freedom-loving, and therefore much better at innovation. The problem is that plenty of that innovation is not really realistic. It is not easy to realize. It is overthinking and so on. But everybody is trying to push and trying, you know, to get his project or her project into the pipeline. That means financed by the Ministry of Defense and then pushed into production. The next problem is the quality of expertise within the Ministry of Defense. Essentially, there is no quality of expertise, but there is, you know, who is going to pocket more. It means if you bribe the right persons, you first have to bribe the right persons outside of Ukraine. This is interesting, Ukrainians outside of Ukraine, in order to get in touch with the Ministry of Defense, in order to present them your project as a Ukrainian. And then you have to bribe somebody at the Ministry of Defense to buy your project and to start financing it. Mm-hmm. Without this, nothing is working. And then you have, as I said, the Ministry of Defense then says, okay, now you have the project in production, but we are not responsible for any further distribution or anything else. You have to sort this with brigade commanders. I've written a specific post on my blog, and I want to hit with my head the desk on which I'm working the whole time, because I cannot understand this kind of incompetence, this kind of disorganization, this kind of, I don't know how to describe it. This is Ukrainian side. Then on the Russian side, you have this, everything is centralized, very centralized. That means nothing happens without people at the top bringing their decisions. Nobody dares bring decisions. Nobody dares saying da without first ascertaining that the level above says da. So that means in most of cases, decisions are going all the way up to Putin, which in turn means that decisions are taken very slowly. fortunately. But the problem is that the Russians are given a lot of time to bring their decisions and then to implement these decisions. And once they bring a decision, for example, to manufacture Shahid, alias Geran, in big numbers, and they have brought this decision, then they are constructing ever more factories. There are ever bigger factories, and suddenly, as we have seen this now, suddenly under apostrophes, they are launching 300 Shahid or Gerans over Ukraine per night, which is oversaturating the Ukrainian capability to defend. Ukraine neither has enough SAMs for that, nor interceptors, manned interceptors like F-16s and Mirages, nor enough interceptor drones. So this is no accident. This is no incompetence or something. On the contrary, it is just a different system of acquisition, production, and implementation, or application in this case. This is not bad nor worse, and it could be easily defeated had, and this is which we are getting back to the problem of decision-making in Ukraine, which is incompetent to the bone. I'm sorry to say it. Ukraine could have had hundreds of attack drones already back in August, September 2023, at least. But back then, decision was taken that this is going to be a short war, and that Russia is going to be defeated by a single blow or by some kind of major victory on the battlefield, and therefore this is not necessary. And as a result of that mistake back in 2022, 2023, and similar other mistakes.
Well, Tom,
3 years later,
that mistake,
Ukraine still does not have hundreds of UAVs.
Yes, but in that mistake, many people were involved. Not only Ukraine, but also the United States, or the Boris Johnson who was coming back and forth to Kyiv.
Excuse me, Natalie, just a second. There is only one person who insisted on launching or fell for the illusion of some kind of super huge, big offensive success, capture or liberation of Melitopol and drive to the Azov Sea. And this person has insisted on such an operation. Or at least he has signed the order for particularly such an operation. There is just one person for this. There is just one person who at the same time didn't like this idea and then favorized his own idea, which was a counteroffensive in the Bakhmut area in 2023. So at the time, all of Ukraine was trying to launch this offensive and run this offensive in southern Zaporozhye and drive to the Azov Sea, as per the order from top of the tops. This fantastic gentleman in question, general of fantastic news, was running his own operation in the Bakhmut area, which meant that as a result of this operation, 2 or 3 very skilled, very good Ukrainian brigades were not involved in the operation in the counteroffensive in the south, but remained busy mauling 6 brigades of the Russian army in the Bakhmut area. So, but this general was then declared for successful, and that not by me, but by the top of the tops. And he was then put in charge of the entire armed forces. So what is there to say about this? I didn't put him in that position. But there was, again, one specific person who did so. Whether on advice for somebody else or not, but essentially, it was just this one person. Sorry.
Yeah, I got your point. Yes. And, how are Russian missiles now improving? Because Ukrainian air defense is struggling more often. I hear that. We're all living in Kyiv. We hear that. What kind of air defense does Ukraine now need? Do we need something, I don't know, something new, something that we haven't had before in air defense?
Not even that. That is the irony of this entire situation. At earlier times, in 2022, 2023, you could monitor Russian missile and UAV strikes on Ukraine, and it was easy to conclude they were undertaken, run haphazardly. There was no coordination between different strikes, but different missiles from different directions. They would run, for example, an missile strike by 8 missiles from the north in the morning, then give Ukrainians 2 or 3 hours to, restock their missiles, to replace those they have fired, to install new ones on the launchers, then redirect their attention to the south, and then they would attack from the south, and then they would attack from the east, and so on and so on. In leisurely fashion, everything was fine. And what a surprise! By the autumn of 2022, Ukraine was quite successful and effective in reorganizing its integrated air defense system and defending itself from such strikes. Yeah. If you give Russians 2 and then 3 years of time, they're going to learn their lessons, and they're going to learn to organize their UAVs and organize their missiles and organize their entire operation and planning for such operations in such a fashion that they are simultaneously striking the same area from different directions. And that not with 2 or 3 or 8 or 10 or 12 missiles, but by 30, 40, 50 UAVs and missiles. Which means they are now regularly oversaturating Ukrainian ground-based air defenses. So, to add to this, in 3 years, NATO did nothing to significantly increase its production of surface-to-air missiles. Nothing. It's going to do so later this year, and then in the next year. There is no need to hurry. Why? This is just Ukraine, and nobody cares. So this means that Ukraine first ran out of supplies of its original missiles, those left over from the Soviet times, then spent all the replacement missiles of Soviet origin acquired from abroad, then spent the mass of whatever USA and Europeans have supplied to it. In other cases, NATO was or specific NATO members or governments of specific NATO members were so wise, so far-sighted, that they have, for example, supplied an entire battery of SAMP-T surface-to-air missiles, but with only enough missiles to last for 2 or 3 weeks, which means, okay, now keep in mind, Ukrainians have spent, 2, 3, 6 months of training their operators for this system. Then everything was brought to Ukraine, and then in 2 or 3 weeks, all the missiles were spent. And what now? They're sitting around and waiting to get replacement missiles, but they cannot operate. So the entire effort was in vain. Excuse me. So, and then finally, then the F-16s arrived and Mirages arrived and so on. So now Ukrainian armed Air Force is actually operating F-16s and Mirages and trying to use them to replace the surface-to-air missiles which they are missing. Correspondingly, you hear regular reports, F-16s and Mirage pilots shooting down 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or even more in one case of Russian UAVs and cruise missiles in a single sortie. And they are regularly flying every single pilot is regularly flying 2 combat sorties per night. I mean, you have to imagine this, flying, just try to stay awake by night, but then try to fly 2 combat sorties per night. And this is immense strain put on the pilots. Okay, so they were simultaneously enhanced through the introduction of electronic warfare systems. And these are quite effective. But in grand total, the Russians have learned their lessons after 3 years. What a surprise. And therefore, they are oversaturating Ukrainian air defenses, whether flying interceptors or UAVs or electronic warfare systems or air defenses, ground-based air defenses, by simultaneously attacking the same spot or same target or same area with 30, 40, 50 UAVs and then additional missiles to that. And what a surprise, Ukrainian air defenses are in grand total less effective than they were 2 years ago.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
I mean, this is not funny,
Absolutely.
I'm smiling about this because this was all obvious that this is going to happen already years ago. There were people, not me, others were warning already years ago. Please do something, increase the production of SAMs, increase the production of that, while there was still time to do so. We are talking about autumn 2023. We are talking about spring of 24. About autumn of 24 again. We're talking about months and years passing by and nothing happening to increase the production, to find cheaper replacements and so on. both Ukraine and the West are always 2 or 3 steps behind developments instead of being ahead of them.
Yeah.
And there are logical consequences of this.
Germany's first funded long-range weapon for Ukraine will be ready in weeks. And my question is, could Western investments in Ukraine's defense industry become a long-term trend?
There's no other solution. Excuse me for interruption now. There's no other solution because nothing else works.
Sign? Do you see it's a optimistic sign?
Of course, yes, I do. I mean, excuse me now. I told you so. It is really so. Back in 2022, I was already explaining on my blog that NATO should stop explaining Ukrainians what to do and how to fight Russians, and instead send them money, of course, in controlled fashion, and then check what is this money spent for, and between others, spend a lot of this money for rebuilding and further developing the Ukrainian defense sector, because Europe obviously does not want to rearm, or if it wants to rearm, then only in very limited fashion. We don't want to provoke Russia, after all. No? We are very friendly people and very civilized, And I said, there was a need to send money to Ukraine and to rebuild the local defense sector. Initially, Kiev was reluctant to accept this kind of aid, but now, 2 or 3 years later, of course, finally it is doing so. And therefore, we have this newest German initiative, which is to support Ukrainian development of long-range attack UAVs like Luti and Bars is the other. So these are going to have a range of 800 to 2,000 kilometers. How soon can now German money get them into mass production, which would be to necessary levels, which would be something like 500 to 1,000 that could be deployed a day? It's a different question, so I'm not talking about just 2 weeks, but I have my doubts that all the necessary operators and infrastructure necessary for such a massive deployment of such weaponry can be deployed within such a short period of time. I'm rather, let's say this way, I'm rather thinking in terms of sometimes next year. Yeah. So it is a very good idea to do so. It is a logical solution. It is going to be a very effective solution, but it should have been taken 2 or 3 years ago. And now, again, once again, 2 or 3 steps behind developments. And now it's taking place, but okay, it's better than nothing.
I was recently listening the interview of Ukrainian former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Dmytro Kuleba. And when you're not at that position, you can speak more openly. And what he said, after all this trying of negotiations and United States leading this process, he said, if they will step out of negotiation, probably that would be for better for Ukraine. It's not the question about whether they give a weapon or not. We're not talking about that. But if they will step back, probably that will be for best. What do you think?
Well, I do not understand, and I had never understood, why has anybody wasted 3 months with negotiating with Trump? About what? Negotiating to bring him more often to the TV in the social media, to give him more reasons to claim or to brag and about his own achievements or whatever. This was absolute waste of time. 3 months or even longer were spent by Ukrainian government, by most of governments of the European Union, to negotiate what exactly? What did they ever hope to achieve in this fashion? And with whom? On one side, they all know better than you or me that Trump is who can be depended upon, nobody who is going to negotiate some kind of super deals, whether with Putin or with Mars people. So what's the point in wasting time with this? And yet they have all eagerly wasted time with this. Instead of taking care about more urgent issues, finding solutions and doing something under apostrophes. They are doing more than enough of something, but nothing serious. So what is then the point of doing this? In that regards, I can only agree with Mr. Kuleba. I'm just wondering why didn't he say to, for example, Mr. Zelensky, and even more so probably to Mr. Yermak, please don't let us waste time with this nonsense, because this is leading nowhere. We are just going to waste time, and in 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 months, we are going to sit here with exactly nothing, which is not what has happened.
You know, isn't that ironic that the person who wrote a book, The Art of the Deal, which I mean Donald Trump, so doing all the mistakes he said in that book, you know, like don't be desperate, because this is going to be the first rule, do not be like desperate in negotiations, something like that. And he's
that is a bad idea to enter negotiations in desperate condition. That is no doubt about this. The problem is just this. Trump's statistics is very clear. 14 owned enterprises, 14 bankruptcies. How many charges of felony? And so on and so on. So what is his statistics? What is his experience? Whom is he? In what kind of position is he to teach somebody, except about bringing himself to power through lies, racism, hatred, discrimination, and you know, dozens of crimes. So, you know, excuse me, I prefer to ignore him, and you know, I always say what he says comes here in and here out, and that's it. And it's pointless to waste time about this. One has to focus on finding a strategy of debilitating Russian military capabilities, on mass destruction of Russian armed forces in the field, and of, you know, destroying this capability to continue pressuring Ukraine. The situation right now is that obviously nobody at the top has an idea how to do this, because otherwise nobody, like General Zaluzhny did, was it last year or the week before, nobody would come to the idea to explain, well, there is no hope of returning even to the situation of 2022, not to talk about 1991. So that means that people in charge simply have no new ideas, which, sorry, for which there is only one logical conclusion. Sorry, the guys in question are all wrong in place. They need to be replaced by somebody who has ideas, who has solutions, or who at least has ideas which can be tested, put to test, and then let's see what comes out. But if you have no ideas how to, even for fundamental strategy of this war, then you are wrong in place as a president, you are wrong in place as an advisor of the president, you are wrong in place as a Glavcom, as commander of the armed forces, you are wrong in place as commander of the army, and so on and so on. So find somebody who has the ideas, whether in Ukraine or in the West. But right now, nobody has ideas. And fact is, okay, Germany is now going to finance production of long-range UAV missiles, or whatever you want to call them, in Ukraine. How is that going to help? Firstly, okay, it might put some pressure on specific segments of the Russian industry, but in long term, who says this is going to be a winning strategy? Because in worst case, the Russians are going to start importing all the components for such for their armament from China. So what have you achieved in this way? You cannot win a war without a strategy, without a plan. And right now, nobody from Kiev to Warsaw and then to Anchorage has a strategy for winning this war.
But what if United States, what if Senate will finally impose the sanctions they are threatening to Russia?
What if?
Well,
what if?
What if? But I mean, if you open the international media, you know, New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, they all discussing that, and I'm reading that, and I'm, you know, I mean, it's in my head, and I'm still have some hope for that.
Natalie, I don't say abandon all hope who enters, but forget this all. One has to be realistic. And we have seen 3 years now, 3.5 almost, of big announcements of they're going to do these sanctions and another wave of sanctions and another round of sanctions. And they're going to meet here, they're going to talk, they're going to negotiate. This is all pointless. They should have all sat down together already on 23rd of February 2022 and said to themselves, okay, Russians have invaded Ukraine, and if we now just send some anti-tank missiles and manpads to Ukraine, that's not going to help in long term. What we need is a major relaunch of our own defense sector, bolster the industry, place orders for tanks, for infantry fighting vehicles, for artillery, even more for ammunition and supplies right away, so we can send all of this to Ukraine. Because fact is, Putin has attacked Ukraine, invaded Ukraine. Therefore, we have to stop this invasion and push him out of Ukraine. That is the point, and this is what is necessary to do. And back then, there was my first interviews for Ukrainian TV, or actually for Ukrainian historian, military historian back then, was what shall Ukraine do as next? And that was in March 2022. And I said, firstly, Ukraine needs strong air defenses, so it can not only protect its cities in the rear, but also its forces in the field, along the front line. Establish a sort of an umbrella for them. And then these forces can hope to advance, to counterattack the Russians and push them out of Ukraine. It's 2025, so 3 years later, more than 3 years later, and these conditions, these fundamental conditions for fighting this war have still not been created by the decision makers at the top in Kiev and in the West. So we are actually back to square one, which means they still have to work on creating such conditions.
Yeah,
and what are now New York Times and whoever else reporting in this regard, and who is going to meet and who is going to announce what? That is pointless, because they are not making decisions. They are just meeting and talking and announcing, but not doing.
Yeah, as you said at the beginning, nobody are in a hurry and in a rush anywhere. Well,
I'm sorry to say it. I know this is not instilling lots of hope and optimism into Ukrainians, and I know you are far more optimistic than such hardcore Central Europeans like me. But fact is, you have to be realistic, and you can't just all the time live in hope. Hope is no strategy. Hope is personal preference. You have to focus on facts. Facts are as they are, as listed before. And fact is, until you accept these facts and start working on solutions, hope is not going to help. Of course, there is an idea, for liberating all of Ukraine and so on, but this is just hope. Yeah. Right now, we don't have material circumstances that would enable this. So we have to create these circumstances where Ukraine can be liberated.
Yeah, actually, I cannot say that I was waiting from you to be optimistic, because I know who Tom Cooper is. But still, I'm really grateful for you to be honest and realistic. And I think it's very important for our audience and for Ukrainians as well.
Well, you can be sure the moment something changes, I'm going to be very happy about, being able to report a change and
you will give us a
positive.
Sign. You will give us a sign. I know.
Just please don't tell me this thing like a colleague of you from some other TV channel in Ukraine that was in spring 23, when she was explaining me that I'm too pessimistic and that the Ukrainians are going to show it to me, with the counteroffensive in the summer of 23. Because I was warning her, don't take the Russians too easily. This is not going to work that easily, and so on. Point is this, again, one has to be realistic, and this is a starting point. You cannot constantly deny and belittle and whenever the Russians, it's a classic example for Ukraine, whenever the Russians bring something new to the battlefield, some new weapon, Ukrainians' first reaction is, ha, it can't do that and it can't do that. Yes, but it is a new weapon and you have no means to counter it. And classic example, this fiber optic cable guided FPVs or UAVs, they are now striking Ukrainian Segway. Nobody's smiling about this. It was similar with CAB glide bombs. You call them CAB, I call them UMPK. So at first, no, they are hitting nothing. They're missing by 100 meters here, 200 meters there. We don't know what are they even targeting. 500 meters over there, some explosion. Last year, we have seen what they can do and what kind of losses they have caused to Ukraine. Then, finally, somebody has developed countermeasures for them and caused them to miss again. But now they are back. Modified Cubs are in operations. They are striking again. If you're belittling such efforts and not taking Russians seriously enough, you're just this is lethal. Nothing else. You're killing yourself.
I also.
No. So what is necessary is to be deadly serious, take this seriously, objectively, especially yourself, the people in charge of the armed forces, the people in command of in political sense, they have to start with themselves, be objective and say, okay, we have messed up here, screwed up there. Now we have to change this, do something else. If they don't do that, they are wrong in place. They have to be replaced. This is what I'm explaining already since autumn last year. So either they change or they are replaced, or they are exchanged. That is the solution. That is where it needs to start. Because right now, Ukraine is actually holding and not collapsing. And this is not only right now, this is actually since 24th of February 2022. It is holding out not because of presidents or generals or heroes of Ukraine, but because of those skilled brigade, battalion commanders, company commanders, section commanders, and plentiful of patriotic Ukrainians, people, everyday people who are fighting, who are getting killed, maimed, or worse, every single day. This is what is holding Ukraine, and not some generals or whoever. So they are actually replaceable. The generals and the politicians are replaceable, not the people who are fighting this war. And this is the point. They need support. They need our help. And this help needs to be organized. It needs a plan behind it, and it needs a purpose. If there is nothing of that, and right now there is nothing, then we can continue talking as much as we like.
Yeah, Tom, thank you so much. Yeah, you should never underestimate your enemy. That's true.
That's the first thing, yes.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time, for your answers, and I hope to see you again.
I hope to see you again under better conditions or more positive circumstances. Absolutely. Thank you very much, everybody.